Welcome to the first episode of my new channel, Mortal Medicine. My name is Kerem Bölek, and I will philosophize with you today about if doctors should be philosophers. As we know, the last 2 years have been filled with turmoil, with doctors being, let's say the least, very blind to what they should be doing. Well, so the question then arises, is it important for doctors to be philosophers? Now, the official definition of that word, philosophy, is someone who is in love with knowledge. And as I see in my medical faculty, a lot of people, they are in love with knowledge, although they seem to be in love with a strange kind of knowledge, which you could see as guideline medicine. And most doctors, I feel like, fall into this trap of following the guidelines. Now, if a lover of knowledge just follows the old knowledge, will he ever learn anything new? Probably not. So it is very, very valid to ask the question, should doctors be philosophers? And if so, what kind of questions should they ask? Of course, the most valuable question one could ask is, what is a good life? What is a healthy life? Because as doctors, you are always busy with health. And most modern medicine is focused on curing diseases which actually could have been very easily avoided. And if we took a more philosophical approach towards health and we looked at how we could be more healthy, perhaps there's a lot to gain there. Let's put it this way. A lot of guidelines we see right now, for example, on PubMed or cardiologist associations or whatever, wherever you look, is based on evidence of previous scientific endeavors, which gave us some basis of knowledge. As a doctor, you have to realize, though, that every individual is different, and you cannot put a one-size-fits-all treatment on any of your patients. You have to really think about what their problem is and work it through. And I see, although I think a lot of people see, that some doctors just prefer to follow blindly the guidelines that have been set in place. And some guidelines, they work. Yes, they work. For example, if someone comes to the clinic to a GP with high blood pressure and this person is smoking, well, the guideline says that you should quit smoking first before you start with medication. That seems perfectly reasonable. The problem, I think, arises when doctors, they decide not to reason for themselves, and they decide that it might be just better to follow the guidelines because it's a safer option, while at the same time maybe missing very, very important details of the patient itself. So looking at it in a clinical perspective, if a doctor is a philosopher, he is in love with the knowledge the patient can provide him. And with the patient, I also mean its body and the way it functions. And that doesn't mean that you have to throw out every knowledge that we already know, every guideline that we already have in place. It just means that we should be more aware of what we do and what we don't know, and how are we going to get the important information that we need to get a proper diagnosis. And maybe the diagnosis is just a way of looking at a pattern that has been caused by weird or strange or unhealthy lifestyle decisions by this patient. I mean, there's a causal relationship with smoking and getting lung cancer. So why is there not a causal relationship found yet between your diet or IBS, irritable bowel syndrome? That seems perfectly logical if you look at it philosophically, if you look at it mechanically. But at the same time, our guidelines on IBS, they call it a somatically unexplainable disease, which is strange because your body digests some things it cannot digest. Take, for example, your sugary drinks, for example, Cola Light. Not sponsored, by the way, and I wish not to be sponsored by them, because they put in their light products aspartame, which is this great thing for our brain. It loves the taste very much so. But our body necessarily cannot break it down very easily. It gets broken down, but into formaldehyde. And formaldehyde is the exact same thing they use to preserve bodily materials. So it's almost like you're embalming yourself from the inside, all for temporarily dopamine pleasure. Now, imagine you have a diet consisting of cola light, some other processed products, and a lot of sugar. I don't think my bowels would very much like that. So is it unreasonable then to suggest that it could be because of your diet that you have irritable bowel syndrome? I think not. And there is this propensity in medicine to just push away the dietary talks because, well, it's too complicated, we can't do any research on it. And that seems the opposite of philosophy. That seems the opposite of science, because nobody really wants to get to know the knowledge. We all intuitively understand, though, that food has a very, very strong relationship with the way our guts work. It's just logical. And, well, talking about philosophy, I was reading this book over again, Beyond Good and Evil by Nietzsche. And he says in this great book that some untruths have to be believed in. People cannot just live with all the truth, and everything that we call truth might change later on. And the new kind of philosopher does not necessarily look at those untruths and then finds a way to prove his own way of thinking, which is like the more normative, tyrannical way of philosophizing. What he says is which untruths are actually necessary and functional for the survival of the being, for the survival of the human, or maybe, for example, the system. So if you look at some untruths in medicine right now, we could think about the untruth of the diet bias. Let's call it that. The diet bias of, it's too difficult to research dietary problems. Well, I hear that in my study at my university a lot, especially in my bachelor years. I've heard it like almost every time I asked something about diet. Oh, well, it's too complicated. We can't really do research on it. Although, if you look at a study, I believe it was published conducted in 1968, and it took 5 years. It was double blind. They compared two groups with dietary intake of fats. One group had animal fats and the other group was divided into plant oils. Now, there's been more evidence supporting the fact that animal fats aren't as bad as was propagated them to be. So who knows? But in that study, it was double blind, and it was in 1968. It's almost like we landed once on the moon in 67, and now we can't do it anymore. It doesn't make any sense. Why can't we do diet studies anymore? Why is that? How come we decided that we could not do it? Which biases are at play here? And these are questions that most doctors should ask themselves, because if these questions go unanswered, a lot of preventable diseases could kill people in the worst cases, or at least destroy their quality of life for the next coming years. There are a lot of people who just destroy themselves with their way of eating, or their way of almost not even nourishing themselves, because the most foods we have, they're so processed beyond the point of actually nourishing you. Like, think about a McDonald's burger. It tastes great. They have been working on the taste like it's the cure for cancer. And ironically, it is not. Because the taste, it just gives this dopamine rush. I mean, try not eating McDonald's for like 2-3 months and then take a bite of that burger again. You just get a head rush because your dopamine just springs up top. It's almost like doing a hit of cocaine almost. It's comparable. Actually, chocolate is more comparable to cocaine when you look at the dopamine levels in your brain. So it gives you great dopamine. You enjoy it very much so. But if you look at the dietary contents, it's mostly just plant oils, which you cannot break down into energy, most of them. And they also cause inflammation, which is pretty bad. And it's mostly just sugars and just a little bit of protein. And because it has been processed so much, our body does not really recognize it, because those millions of years of evolution, they have been working with foods that are actually food. These questions of what is a healthy life, what is a way of living that makes you healthy, what does health mean? These are questions that should be asked by every doctor, I believe. And if they're not being asked, then we just have a office drone, a health office drone, which does not think for itself and just follows the guidelines. And guidelines are always looking at the past, and the past tells us something about trends in the even further past. Although we live in the present and the future is coming, so why look at guidelines like they are the end-all be-all of medical knowledge? Why not trust our own gut feeling or our own thinking and our own rationality to provide us the way forward? Not even as doctors necessarily, but just as humans. And of course, like I said, Nietzsche talks about how some untruths must be held onto to provide the survival of the being. And I understand that some people, they have biases or they have beliefs that they know somewhere deep down inside that are not to be true. But it's functional for them to adopt those beliefs, because if they did not, it would be impossible for them to survive in the current environment. And, there are a lot of examples of that, and some of them have been on, for example, the Joe Rogan podcasts of people who are actually deciding that, no, that gut feeling is too strong to ignore, and I am willing to sacrifice quite a lot to speak my mind. And maybe that's the reason why doctors should be philosophers, because if we do not sacrifice ourselves in a way for our patients, then we will just be sacrificing our patients for ourselves, and then we're doing it the wrong way. We really need to give our view of what health should be to people who are also busy with thinking what health should be, but don't necessarily have the knowledge that we have with all those hours we put into those books or into our universities or into thinking them through. Or at least if you're not thinking them through, you know what the guidelines are, so you can give them some semblance of a treatment, which for some cases might be enough. Of course, it might be enough. So should doctors be philosophers? Well, they should at least try. I think that's a great way to start. They should try to be philosophers, and they should try to figure out the knowledge that brings them more health into their own lives, so that they can transpose that knowledge into their patients. Like, how many doctors smoke? Quite a lot. How many doctors drink? Almost every one of them, especially in the West. And is that a conscious choice? Most of the time not. Most of the time it's just, oh, it's Friday. We always go get drinks on Friday, so why not get drinks on Friday? You might not even necessarily need them or want them, but you just do it. And that is exactly the opposite of knowledge. You're not knowing yourself, you're just doing as your programming has told you. We should try to break out of this if we really want to get the world to be a healthier place. And if we don't, well, we probably will. There's a great necessity to it. We see people waking up to this with ideas of vitamin supplements, regular exercise, and also having a meaningful life with relationships between friends and family. These are all parts of a healthy life, and we should not forget these basic axiomatic truths. Some truths you can try to bend, you can try to break them, but they will break you. And maybe that's the reason why we see such mental health disasters in Western countries. Although I digress. Leave your thoughts in the comments. I will most likely read all of them, because there probably will not be a lot, because this is my first video. If you have any video suggestions, leave them in the comments as well, and I will see you next week. Bye.